move abroad and all of those things are different, you start to see what of your identity was made up by those markers and what is you and what is maybe shifted and what's changed. And I think that process of sort of actively engaging with and changing my identity has given me so much empathy for other people.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, where we believe living with intention through a bucket list lifestyle is a great way to bring yourself personal joy. As you are crossing items off your list, you're actually filling up your bucket. The more items you cross off, the more joy gets added, until eventually your joy spills over into the lives of those around you. Now let's start crossing it off together. This time I'd like to welcome our bucket list storyteller for this episode. Her name is Amber Haggerty, and she describes herself as a world traveler, an expat, thoughtful, and compassionate. Amber, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so tell our listeners, what did you cross off your bucket list?
Move to Ireland.
Move to Ireland. Okay, so first off, where'd you move from?
Good story, or good question. I was living in Colorado during, that's where I'm originally from. And then I had sort of accidentally moved to Philadelphia in March of 2020. So my partner and I had been planning to visit his family, and that's where they live. And we had booked our flight months before for March 10th, 2020. And we flew and we got to Philadelphia, and just right around then was when it felt like everything started to get serious very, very quickly. So we got to Philadelphia. I literally had brought my yoga mat because I thought I'd be going to yoga studios, which sounds goofy now. But yeah, so we found ourselves in Philadelphia. We didn't necessarily want to go back to our tiny apartment in Colorado. So we were in Philadelphia just kind of waiting to see what would happen. And while we were there, we had always talked about moving to Europe. For years and years, we had thought about it. And we were just walking, and I had this thought that there's never been a better time. Like, everything is locked down, our jobs are online, like there's no reason not to do this right now. And so that kind of set this whole set of events in motion. But yeah, so it was sort of a on a whim, one day on a walk.
So what was it about moving to Europe for you that you were having those conversations before you actually did it? Why Europe, and then eventually why Ireland?
Yeah. So importantly, my partner is a dual citizen. So he has an Irish passport. His dad grew up in Ireland. So we had visited, he had grown up, he had spent part of his primary school in Ireland. So I had visited twice before. And I think we just, in the backs of our minds, had always thought, I guess I'll back up a little bit. I think I had always wanted to live abroad, starting, I would say maybe not always, but starting when I was in college. It kind of occurred to me that it would be a fun thing to do. I really enjoyed studying abroad. I studied abroad in Amman, Jordan. And
wow,
after that, it was a very cool experience. And I thought, this is something I really enjoy. So I moved back, and it just was so sort of always in the back of my mind. And we traveled to Europe several times in my 20s, and Ireland appealed to us first. He had some family here. It was a little bit more familiar. We didn't really understand the treaty rights. So in retrospect, we could have moved anywhere in the EU, but we didn't know that at the time, or we didn't really know it at the time. So in a lot of ways, Ireland just felt kind of perfect. And then once we sort of started to move, I think that was when I really fell in love with it. But I don't want to overemphasize how much I was thinking about Ireland, because I think I was just in love with the idea of living abroad. And Ireland just felt like the right place.
And you talked about a little bit about treaty rights and the EU. And so explain that process. He has dual citizenship. And what does that mean for you all in this process of moving?
So the EU treaty rights don't apply to our situation because he is an Irish citizen. He was able to sponsor me as they call it a de facto partner, which is sort of like a spousal visa, but we're just not married. But Ireland looks at them pretty similarly, so it's a really similar process to someone bringing their spouse over. But what I meant by treaty rights, so I have some friends here who are also from the U.S., but married to maybe a Portuguese citizen or a French citizen. And because of treaty rights, those people who have citizenship in other EU countries can sponsor a spouse to come to Ireland. So I know some people just in that situation.
I did not know that. So,
Me either.
yeah. Is that something you learned, in the process, or like when did you figure that out?
Oh yeah. So I would say I actually learned that pretty late into the process. I We had moved, and when we first moved, we moved onto this farm in Wicklow, Ireland, which is the county about an hour south of Dublin. So we were living in this really rural location, and I didn't really meet very many other people because of the lockdowns and all that. But also, I didn't link in with the expat community until we moved to Cork. So we moved down to Cork about a year and a half ago. And when we got here, I kind of took on this project of meeting people, and I was very intentional about it and went to meetups and went on Bumble, BFF, and took all of these different approaches to making friends. And when I started meeting people here and talking to other people who were in similar situations was when I started to learn about how other people had moved and the things that they had done differently. And so that was when I started to learn about things like, yeah, like how treaty rights work or the process of applying for citizenship or all of the kind of intricacies of moving abroad.
So let's go back just a little bit because not that I think there are gaps in your stories, but I want to understand. So you were visiting Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
stuff went sideways, and you decided that okay, now's the time to go. How did you still had your stuff in Colorado, right?
Yes.
So how did all that, like the actual moving process, go for you? How'd that happen?
Yeah. So we had a 6 a.m. flight. So we had left our apartment essentially in the middle of the night. We were living in Boulder. And we never went back to it. My sister happened to be graduating from college at a couple months later. And so she came, lived in our apartment through the end of our lease, packed it up, moved it all. So all of our stuff is sitting in boxes at my dad's house. So she did that for us. And so we moved to Ireland. We had her maybe ship us a couple of boxes. So we moved to Ireland with whatever the luggage allowance was. I think one checked bag each, one carry-on, and like a personal item. And so we went back and got some more stuff over time. But I know other people have done shipping containers. That didn't occur to us. I didn't know that was a thing people did until long after. So yeah, we moved with a pretty light amount of stuff, but we also were not 1000% committed to moving, if I'm
Mm.
honest. We kind of went with the mentality of trying it out to see if we liked it because we didn't have, we had all of our stuff in Colorado. So I think it was a little bit of a strategic decision to try to be a little bit more nimble since we didn't know exactly what we were getting into.
Yeah, that sounds smart. We've discussed the physical stuff. Talk to me about the work situation. So you work remotely. How did your employer handle that? What's kind of is there a pay differential? Is there more taxes? How does all that portion of this work? Start with the work, like the actual still having a job and
Yeah.
into the ramifications of doing that in Ireland.
Yeah. So when we first moved, our companies had both gone fully remote because of the pandemic. So when we moved, I had 6 months. My employer was willing to have me be abroad for up to 6 months. So my partner's employer didn't mind having him be abroad. They were a small startup, so that was fine with them. So we both moved and just continued working and still continue to work U.S. East Coast hours. So we work from 2 to 10 p.m. And so after 6 months, we weren't ready to go back. That was also part of why we were kind of dipping our toe in. So, because my employer had set this kind of deadline. So we reached the 6 month mark. It was still deep in the lockdowns of early 2021. So I left that job, and then I eventually started doing some contract work. So I've been contracting. He's still with his startup. So we have, I would say, an unusual situation, though. I think most people who move find work within Ireland. So I would say continuing to work for US companies. I know people who do it, but I think it's a little bit less common.
And financially wise, it just all still goes through the US. Do you pay taxes in Ireland, or do you pay taxes in both? How does that work?
So I have to file taxes in both Ireland and the US. But because the two countries have a tax treaty, I don't get double taxed.
Right.
So any income I make, regardless of what account it goes into, I pay. I'm pretty sure it's Irish taxes first, and then count those towards my US taxes. But you still have to, when you're a US citizen living abroad, you still have to file your taxes every year.
And for your partner, his because
Uh,
he's an Irish citizen.
that doesn't change his tax situation. So he's basically, his employer is handling, because he's a W-2, I think his employer is handling everything.
Okay. So you make it over to Ireland, and what is that experience like? You say you were a little hesitant. Of course, it was in the middle of this craziness. What were you feeling once you got there? Were you homesick? Did it feel like home? What was going
Mm,
through your head?
yeah, great question. So I think when we first moved, it felt novel and exciting and like a
Hmm.
little and really fun. And I had been to Ireland in the summer, but it had been many years at that point. So it was late summer, it was like August. So we got there, and I think it was kind of just this wash of newness. And it's sort of like, where do you buy things? What are the good stores? Like, what are, how do you find a blender? What's the best store to buy a blender? Like those kinds of things, at first were like very fun, very new. And so I think, yeah, I think it was a really fun time. I think the kind of harder parts set in later. So I did feel really homesick later. And there were parts of it that set in and felt really hard. But yeah, I think I definitely had a honeymoon period when I first moved.
Yeah, I lived in Italy for 2 months, but I think I knew that it was going to come to an end, so I didn't really experience that. It was all honeymoon for the most part.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Here at the Crossing It Off podcast, we are passionate about inspiring you in your bucket list lifestyle and empowering you to live out your list. We offer many resources to assist you in your bucket list journey, such as web resources in the show notes, bucket list mentoring services, my book Live Out Your Lists, a private Facebook group for you to share your bucket list success stories with others, and more. All of these can be found at crossingitoffpodcast.com. Find the resource that fits your need so that you can live out your list. Now back to the show. So you talked a little bit about the expat community. Of course, during lockdown, you didn't have access to that. So can you describe that experience and how you went about finding folks and when you got to Cork, and what was that like?
Mm, yeah. I want to give my former self a little bit of credit. I did try when we were living in the kind of rural area, but just
Mm.
it was between the lockdowns and between the gaps in my information. I just wasn't very successful. Just saying that for littler me, but yeah, when I moved to Cork, I was tried to be pretty serious. So I'm a pretty big fan of goal setting. So my goal was to try to attend, I think I was trying to attend one meetup a week. And then found out about Bumble BFF, which is Bumble, the dating app, and they have a friend side.
Sure.
So I got on that, and I was trying to spend at least I think I was probably trying to spend an hour a day messaging people. And I was like, I'm going to get my goal. The thing I told myself was I'm going to get off the app. So as quickly as possible, I want to get
Just
in.
like dating.
Yeah, exactly. Like I want to have coffee with someone. I already had my friends in the US. I didn't need more online friends is what I told myself. So yeah, getting in person. And it took a while. It was very easy to start talking to people, but it took quite a while to really find for me and for my partner, for us to find our people. But yeah, so that experience, I think it was good that it was slow at first because it was so new. And also it was coinciding with the lockdowns and the pandemic response in the US lifted sooner than Ireland. So, things were still pretty closed down in early 2022. So it was a little bit of a melting, I think, across the board.
And besides Bumble, were there other things that you used? Are there Facebook groups? Are there, how does the expat community like congregate and thrive
Mm.
in Cork?
Yeah. So there's a Facebook group for it's just Americans in Ireland. There's another one for Americans living in Cork. So both of those are very active. I wouldn't say the reason I didn't bring them up is that I didn't actually meet anyone on those sites, but they exist and they do meetups. Just meetup.com has some events. So I've met people through those. Also Eventbrite. I don't know, every once in a blue moon, it just occurs to me to check Eventbrite, but I've met friends at Eventbrite events. And then I would say I personally have had the most success with Bumble. And so, meeting people and Cork is not that big of a town. I think it's like 250,000 people. So once you sort of start meeting people, it's much easier because people will introduce each other or you'll find, you'll meet someone in person that you talk to on Bumble. And I had that experience a bunch of times. So I think because of the size of the city, it's a little bit more accessible. And once I kind of put myself out there, it was easier to kind of make more and more and more connections.
Yeah, when I think about being an expat, I think that there's, I think of finding the pub or wherever that everybody congregates. Is that a real thing, or is that just my imagination or what I've seen on TV?
If there is, I don't want to say that there's not a pub because there might be, and I just haven't found it yet. But I would say the groups that I've been a part of were kind of organic friend groups that mostly were made up of people who met on Bumble, is most of what I've run into. So mostly it's a friend. I have one group of friends that are almost all from the US. And we just started meeting each other on Bumble. And then it was, if there was some synergy, then we bring in one more person. And so we have a book club and we have we have garden parties and we have, go to concerts and that sort of thing. So I'm hesitating because I'm like, yeah, maybe there is a pub and I just haven't been there.
Amber, tell me like one thing that's been like the most standout experience you've had or the most joy you've had from doing this and crossing it off your list.
Yeah, I think one thing that I just feel so grateful for is that this experience of living in Ireland, I think has given me such an access to empathy that I don't think I would have had before. And I think that empathy comes from moving abroad has this kind of profound impact on your identity. And you start to notice the longer you are away from home, the more you notice how much of your identity is made up from these markers, from the people around you and the cultural context and, the people that you see when you go to the grocery store. And you start to see how much of when you move abroad and all of those things are different, you start to see what of your identity was made up by those markers and what is you and what is maybe shifted and what's changed. And I think that process of sort of actively engaging with and changing my identity has given me so much empathy for other people and how they might be seeing themselves. And maybe that sounds, I'm not sure how that sounds, but I think, when I see other people and, they're going through something really hard, or they're talking about going through a challenge, even if I don't understand what the challenge is, I can understand what it feels like to just feel like your world has dropped out from underneath you, and you need to kind of pick up the pieces and put it back together and find out, what's really me, and what matters to me, and how do I actually want to live my life, and doing it in this totally new context, with surrounded by, especially with when you're talking about other expats, surrounded by other people who have done that same dance. And so I think that has changed me in a way that brings me a lot of joy, but also I think brings me a lot of compassion for others, that just on a level that I just don't think I had before, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I love that. I think that it can also happen. You don't have to move out of the country, but definitely moving across the country. I think, I grew up in the Midwest and now I live in the Pacific Northwest, and it's a different world here. It's
Mm-hmm.
one of the great things about the United States is that it's extremely, extremely diverse in lots of different ways. And when you were giving all those lists of examples, geography, I think, is also a marker that people, just I have mountains and I have the
Mm-hmm.
sound and I have all these wonderful things that I get to do that middle of Indiana, there's not a lot of hikes that are too strenuous. They can be long but not elevation changes. So I think for me that was one of the things that definitely transformed me a little bit when I made that move. So I get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amber, if somebody was sitting at the cafe with you and you were talking and you were sharing this experience with them and they said, yeah, I think I would like to do that, maybe not Ireland, maybe someplace else, what would be the one thing that you would say to them that they need to do? If there was an X, you got to do X, what's the X?
I think the X is find your people,
Mm,
and do it in a way that is serious and with some real intentionality. And I think that with friendships, it can be so easy to look at our experiences in school or when we're younger, especially if you grow up somewhere that's, got a lot of community. I think it can be really easy to move and just expect things to happen.
hmm.
Um, and sometimes they just don't happen. And that's okay. But you'll need the way to respond to it is just to be really intentional and to remember that other people are having experiences where they're also just looking for friendship to happen. And so if you can be the one who steps out of your comfort zone and invites them, and be the person who have people over at your house, have make the plans, be really intentional, and be really just be really intentional about making community, because moving abroad, moving to Ireland, moving to any country moving within the US is a really isolating experience. You're moving from what you know to what you don't know, and in that, there's so much potential, but I think you can really make your life a lot richer and your experience a lot easier if you have people around you, physically around you, to share the experience with, and stay, of course, in touch with people from home. Like, don't lose those
Sure.
ties either. But yeah, like, really, really make the in-person stuff happen.
Yeah, it's for some people that's an extremely difficult task in general, just even not having the move. So doing the move on top of that, I would think you would really need to be intentional about making friends and growing that community around you. It's important. Amber, what else is on your bucket list that you want to cross off?
So I thought about this. I think the big life thing is becoming a dual citizen. I really want
Mm,
to work towards that, in Ireland, and I think it's a few years off, but yeah, it's on my bucket list.
what kind of process do you have to go through with that in Ireland?
So, because I am here as a de facto partner, I need to reside in Ireland for 5 years. I've been here for about 2.5, and then After that point, when I have enough, they count the days, but once I have enough days, which equates to about 5 years, then I can apply. And the application process, I've only talked to people who have done it who were married, which I think is a little bit simpler.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a pretty involved, long process. It was a long process to get the visa to come here. My application was 400 pages. So I imagine the
Oh,
citizenship process is going to be longer. But yeah, so you pull all that together, send it, and they yeah, I think it takes about a year to get a decision at this point. But I have a friend who just sent her application. So excited for her. And but yeah, I think it's a mostly just keeping really good records and being ready to send them off.
what's the why there for you? Why do you want to do that? Because some Americans would be like,
Mhm.
no, I would never do that. But what's the why for you?
One of the things that I really love about Ireland is I think that there is so I have so much pride, and I mean I feel like it's maybe not my place to have it, but Ireland is right next to Britain. It's literally the next island over, and Ireland fought so hard to be its own country and
Mhm.
to be its own nation and for its own kind of self-determination. And I in Cork especially, which calls itself the rebel city, which is where I live, I just feel reminded of that all the time, and I feel so inspired by it. And I think that really drives me to want to go for Irish citizenship in particular. Also, my family is ancestrally Irish, and so that part feels good also. But yeah, I think it is a place that I have this kind of profound respect for, and I think that's part of why. And then I think there's also a lot of practical bits to being able to travel more freely through the EU, and to be able to stay longer and not be on tourist visas and that sort of thing. So there's practical elements, but when I really get into the why, I think that's why.
It's awesome. Amber, can you share with us, where you are online and what you're doing there?
Yeah, I have a travel blog. I write mostly about Ireland and Colorado, the two places I've lived the longest, and or two places I've lived. I also lived in Massachusetts. But yeah, so I write about Ireland and Colorado and some other European destinations. And my website is ambereverywhere.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at amber.everywhere.
Awesome. We'll make sure that those go in the show notes so that everybody can find you very easily. Amber, thank you so much for being here, and good luck on getting that citizenship. It sounds like I would give it to you if I had the authority, but I don't. So,
Well,
but
thank you.
yeah, but I think you're worthy. So thank you for being here, Amber.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.